Hello, and welcome to Notes9. I'm David Leedy. Episode 64, Creating Global Custom Controls. You will see some serious stuff. Okay, this is a show I'm very excited about. Tim Tripcony is back on the show, and he's works with GBS, and he's an IBM champion, and he has this cool title called X Mage, and he's just all around awesome. And what we're going to talk about today, and what he's going to come on, is we're going to talk about reusing custom controls. So it's basically like if you know what the OpenNTF extension library is, you can make your own, and it's really not that difficult in a way. And I thought this was going to be over my head, and I'd be, sucking my thumb as I watched this. But I actually could understand most of this, and I think I could almost even do this if I needed to. So why would we want to make our own extension library? Well, it leads to more rapid application development capabilities. You can put this on your server or a customer's server or so, and now the tooling that you put in there is just available to every database. You don't have to go out and get it and stuff like that. It's going to be there for you, similar to the way the extension library works. You can get fancier with this, with what's called phase injection, and there's a lot of other these fancy, really high end stuff that I don't know really what it means. But I will tell you this: at the day job, I get to work with Declan Lynch, and what he did is he made one of these extension libraries based on the OpenNTF starter kit, and he's provided tooling for our internal apps. So if we have an app that contains all our work orders, well, now I've got custom at functions and some other custom code where in any other app that I'm using, I can just tie in and do a lookup. I can just say at lookup work order key and get the field that I want from the document or so. Very, very nice. He also has provided capability to inject into the application layout control. So if I throw down a next page that has the application layout control from the extension library, he actually puts in the legal footer, the login and logout stuff, and some other things, and I have to do nothing for it. So me, I'm not a great UI guy. I'm more of a kind of like a back end, just a business logic guy and stuff like that. So it's less stuff for me to do. So there's a lot of power in this technique if you take it to that level. But that being said, I don't want you to be scared about this because, like I said, I understood this, so it can't be that difficult. This video has some really good X Pages information in there just on how some things work. So even if you don't want to go to this level of what Tim does by building the extension library, it's worth watching just to check it out and see what it is. And it's based on this XSP starter kit, which is on OpenNTF, which Nathan Freeman did, and I think Nicholas Heidloff added some stuff to it. I thought I saw his name on the project. But if you watch this video, it really doesn't look too difficult. It's really about making your custom control and copying and pasting certain parts into certain areas and making just a couple mods to make it work. So it really is digestible. And I gotta be honest with you. I mean, sometimes you talk to Tim, it's tough. But he did a great job on bringing this down to a level that makes it understandable. So again, I'm ecstatic about this. I hope you guys are too. And with that being said, here is the demo.
Hello. In today's demo, we're going to be discovering how you can take an existing custom control and turn that into a library component, which is a reusable artifact that you can implement in any of your XPage applications without having to copy a design element from NSF to NSF. So step one is you actually need to have an existing custom control. So for this example, we'll be using the inline editor custom control that we looked at in a previous episode. In this instance of Designer, I'm running 853 with Upgrade Pack 1 installed, but this process actually will work correctly going all the way back to 852. So once we've got a custom control that we want to make more reusable, we want to go to the Package Explorer within Designer. Now, in 853, there's an X Pages perspective, and that's the one that I currently have selected. And in that perspective, there's an Eclipse view part that shows up by default, which is known as the Package Explorer. But if you're using a previous version or a different perspective, it's easy to add this. Just go to the window menu, select Show Eclipse Views, select Other, start typing Package, and you'll see that show up. Now it's grayed out because it's already in my perspective, but if you hadn't already included it, you'd be able to select that and click OK. So, now that we have the Package Explorer selected, there's a couple of things we want to look at. The first is, whenever we create an X page, we know that it creates an XSP file in the NSF. When we create a custom control, it also creates an XSP file, and that's the actual XML of the custom control. But what isn't as commonly known is that it also creates a separate XML file that has an XSP-config syntax. So if we open that up and look at the source, we'll see a couple interesting things about this. One is that there are lists of properties, and these are the custom properties that I defined that the custom control accepts. And so it defines what the type is for each, and a display name, and so forth. So anytime we're editing a custom control, it's editing the XSP file, but it's also maintaining the XSP config file that is just metadata about the custom control. So this file is going to be key for us in a couple moments. The next file that we want to look at is under this local folder at the very top and in the XSP package. As most XPage developers know, the XML in an XSP file is not the source code. This is simply an instruction set for a designer to be able to generate the source code that will be executed when the user accesses the XPage. So the actual source code is a Java file that designer generates. And if we look at that, we can probably get a feel for what's going on here, because we know that our custom control contains some repeat controls and spans and things of that nature, some images and event handlers. So if we stare at this long enough, we can tell what's going on in here, but it's not necessarily something that we would want to maintain in this format. So yeah, it's probably a good thing that designer generates this for us automatically. But we want to keep a ready handle on this file for the next step. So what then is the next step? Well, we want to create a new library project. When you want to create reusable components that are going to be available to all your applications, not just the NSFs that contain design elements specific to those components, we have to create what is known as an OSGI plugin. And the easiest way to do that nowadays is to go out to OpenMTF and find a project known as the XSP Starter Kit. There's all sorts of fun stuff in here. If you ever want to really dig into how XPages really works and understand what's going on behind the scenes, which obviously the advantage of that is then more of your development is intentional. You're coding on purpose instead of trial and error. So I highly recommend downloading this and just exploring it, even if you never actually use it. For the purposes of this demo, however, we're just going to go ahead and download the latest release. So this downloads a jar file rather than what we're used to seeing for an OpenNTF project, which would be like a zip file or an actual NTF, etc. This is just a jar file, a Java archive. So now that we've got that on the machine, we can go back to Designer And because I'm in the X pages perspective, there's an option that I need that doesn't show up. So I'm going to very quickly switch to the Java perspective. And now the menu option that I need is available. Under the File menu, I'll select Import. Under General, I want to choose Existing Projects into Workspace. And that's because the XSP Starter Kit is an exported project. So if I browse to my downloads and I select that jar file and open it, it detects that this jar file contains a project. Sometimes when you're downloading exported projects from the web, you may find a jar file that actually contains numerous projects. In this case, it only contains one. So we'll just select that and click Finish. And now I see that I have a new project in Eclipse. So now what we need to do, because this project is inherently an OSGI component library that we can install into Domino, but also into Designer, let's take a look at some of the structure of this. It has a source folder that is part of its build path, and there are a number of packages in here. And this is where all the code is that you might find interesting if you explore it to see some of what happens behind the scenes in XPages. But there's really only two packages that we're going to care about for the purposes of this demo. One is the components package, and the other is the library package. So let's go ahead and expand those for now, and we'll come back to those shortly. So the components package in the base XSP starter kit already includes several component definitions. So we just want to add one to that. So if we go back up here and we find our inline editor Java file, all we need to do is copy that and actually just paste that into the components package. So now this inline editor Java file that Designer automatically generated for us is part of our component library. But there's a catch. We need to make the library aware of its existence. And that consists of a couple steps. So if we go back to our custom controls folder, and we find this XSP config file that Designer generated for us, let's go ahead and copy that. And if we scroll down to this meta-inf folder, and something that you'll want to take note of is that this is a subfolder of the source folder. It's part of the Java build path. The plugin itself also contains a meta-inf folder, and that's used for other things. We don't need to worry about that right now. Just take note of the fact that we're dealing with the meta-inf folder that is a subfolder of the source. If we expand that, we'll see that there are already a couple of XSP config files in place. And these are ones that refer to these other example components that the project already included. So this is a perfect place to include our custom XSP config file. So now if we open that up, there are just a couple of things that we want to change in here. Now the first is, if we're looking at our namespace, URI, and prefix, in the original application, I overrode these. Ordinarily, the prefix would be XC, and the namespace URI would be an IBM.com URL. However, if you customize those in your own application, then in your X pages where you're referencing custom controls, you have a little better indication of where those custom controls came from. So in this case, it's one I downloaded from OpenNTF, or it's part of some other project or application. So that way it's not just some, generic custom control. But that saves us a little bit of head time, gives us a little bit of a head start in this, because anytime you're creating a component library, you want to specify a custom namespace URI anyway. Now, in this case, the XSP Starter Kit has a URI that is indicative of the fact that this is the XSP Starter Kit. So if I go back into the one that I created, my URI is slightly different, even though I'm using the same default prefix. So let's just paste in the one that the rest of the plugin uses, just so that we're consistent throughout because the URI and prefix mapping always needs to stay the same for Designer to be able to compile projects using these components. Then there's only one other thing that we actually need to change in this file, and it's the value of this composite file tag. As I mentioned earlier, the XSP source code is not the true source code. That's just an instruction set for a designer to generate the job. So by the time the user actually runs the code, the XSP file doesn't matter anymore. Domino really isn't even aware of it because it knows what Java to run, so it just runs it. Well, in the case of this component library, we've got the Java, therefore we don't need the XSP file. But we do need to tell the plugin how to find the Java. So the way that we do that is we take a look at this, the package that we put this inline editor Java file into. So the easiest way to do this is if I do a rename, well, I'll just type it in. So we're going to duplicate the package name, but instead of decimals, we'll use slashes to denote the hierarchy. So we'll start with org, OpenNTF, XSP, starter, components, and then we end with inline editor. Since this isn't actually an XSP file, we can go ahead and lop off that file extension, and we are done with this file. So just to review, we've pasted in the component class that Designer generated for us. We had pasted in an XSP config file that Designer also generated for us, but we've made two slight modifications to it. So now, the only thing left to do is we have to make the library aware of this XSP config file. So the XSP config file is able to find this Java class. We need the library to be able to find this file. So if we open that up, every OSGI component library for Xpages includes a class that extends this base class of abstract XSP library. So in the case of the XSP starter kit, we have this starter library class, and any of these library classes will include a method called getXSPConfigFiles. And this is how the library knows which of these XSP config files actually define components or data sources or other complex types. So this method just returns a string array of all of the relative file paths of these XSP config files. So if we just duplicate an existing one and change it to where it's the actual path of the file we added, this library is now aware of our custom component. And that's literally all that we need to do. Now, of course, if you've never deployed a component library, it might be worthwhile to take a quick look at how you actually do that. So, excuse me. So if we go to File New, and select Other. Under Plugin Development, because this is an OSGI plugin we're developing, let's create a feature project. And let's call this org.opennmtf.xsp.starter.feature. And this is completely arbitrary. You can call your feature whatever you want. The key is giving it a feature name that is indicative of what it's actually for. But technically, the feature ID and project name can be anything you want, as long as it's unique. So, if we select Finish, I'm not going to bother switching to the plugin development perspective. So, a feature is a collection of plugins. So, if we select the Plugins tab, and we click Add, and start typing org.opennmtf, we see that this starter kit that we downloaded is a plugin, and it uses this dot qualifier for its numbering convention. So I'm going to select that plugin, and that's the only one that we need to add. But I'm going to go back to this overview, and I'm going to use the same dot qualifier syntax. What that does is that every time I make changes to this, Eclipse will grab what the system time is, and it will increment the version number of it to match that. So if you've ever looked at the actual plugins that are included in Notes or Domino, you'll see these big long timestamps included in the plugin file name, and that's why. So now that we've saved our feature project, the only thing really left to do is create an update site project. So I'll just maintain the same convention. And again, this is completely arbitrary. You can call it anything you want. So just as a feature is a collection of plugins, an update site is a collection of features. So we'll start typing org again, OpenMTF. Hang on a moment. Aha, okay. There we go. As you can see, it works a lot better when you know what you named your feature. So if I select that feature, theoretically, just as we could add a whole bunch of plugins to the feature, we could add a whole bunch of features to an update site. But as this is a very simple demo, we'll keep it simple. So now that I have a feature that includes one plugin, our starter kit, and an update site that is going to be the distribution model for that single feature. If I click Build All, Eclipse is going to go off and do all sorts of magic. And now we can see that we have an updated feature with a timestamp indicative of when we actually did all this. So if I go to now we're back in the Java perspective. So let me switch back to my old friend the XPages perspective. And so now in the application menu, I have an option for install. I'll leave this selected because I do want to search for new features. And I want to add a folder location to be able to install what I just compiled. So if I go to wherever Notes is actually installed, in this case, it is in the default location. So within the data folder, where all your templates would be and such, there's also a workspace folder, and this is where the Eclipse portions of Designer actually live. So you can see that all of these projects we imported and created now show up inside the workspace folder under data. Well, the project we just created, the update site, is one of those, and we see that it contains subfolders for features and plugins. That's always a good sign when you're looking for an update site. So if we select that, just going to rename that to XSP Starter Kit, click OK. And so I'm going to skip looking for updates to the extension library and just look for updates to the XSP Starter Kit. Now in this case it's a local location, so it's only going to include the changes that we just demoed. When I click Finish, it'll detect that there's a feature that is either new or has been updated. So in most update sites, you'll see numerous categories and numerous features. But in this one, obviously, we just added one. So I'll just select the whole thing, click Next. If I had defined a license description, here's where it would show up. I'll accept the non-existent terms and click Finish. So now it's going to give me one more chance to not install what I'm trying to install. So now it indicates that it's been installed, so I just need to restart. So close this down Designer and Notes if you have that open too. And authenticate. As you can see, I have a blindingly fast processor. Okay, launch Notes for me. So now let me go back to where I want to be, which is Designer. And now, just in case you're curious, if we go back to that application menu, and instead of selecting Install, we select Application Management. Under this middle category here, which refers to that workspace path that you saw earlier, we now see that the XSP Starter Kit is installed. So let me open up just any generic application that, well, how about my address book? Pretty fair bet that this doesn't contain any custom controls. Kind of wish it did though, don't you? Anyway, so let's go ahead and create a new X page, and we'll just call it demo. We're deleting it afterwards anyway. So if I go over to my control panel, we now see OpenNTF Starter Kit listed as a category, and one that we added is not there. The reason for that is when we originally created the custom control, another one of the fields that you can select, so library control, that determines where over here that'll show up. So if we do a little exploration though, under custom controls, inline editor shows up even though I'm in an application that doesn't contain any. When I drag it over, it's going to pop up a warning that this is associated with a library that this app doesn't use yet. So I could obviously click cancel, but if I click continue, then there's a couple things that have happened. One is it's added the reference to the custom control to our new X page. It's updated the namespace attributes of the view root tag for this X page so that, again, that mapping that we talked about earlier between the prefix and the URI, this is the way that in XML it's able to maintain that relationship. So if we were to make changes to this, it would compile because it's able to know that this URL is associated with this prefix, and this prefix is associated with a certain library, and then this component maps to a specific Java file. But the other thing that happened when we dragged that on is if we open the application properties and switch to the advanced tab, we will see that it has automatically selected for me this starter library. If I go back into the app that this actually came from, that is now an option. It's not selected because I haven't added anything to it that requires this library, but I could just manually select this in case I ever want to use it in this application. So that's all there is to it. Just to do a quick recap, essentially all you have to do to move these custom controls into being library controls is you need an OSGI plugin, and you want to copy over the Java file for the custom control, and the XSP config file from the custom controls folder. And just again to recap, the Java file for the custom control can go into any package that that is associated with that is part of the build path. The XSP config file you want to put in meta-inf, and then you want to make the library aware of the new XSP config file in the get XSP config files method. And one other recap item, after you pasted in the inline editor, or I'm sorry, the XSP config file, you want to make sure that the namespace URI and prefix is consistent with the rest of your OSGI plugin library, and you want to replace the reference to the XSP file in composite file with a / delimited reference to the new location of the Java file. So, although it took a half hour to show how all this works and explain what's going on behind the scenes, once you've done this 2 or 3 times, it becomes muscle memory, and on average, it's 3 to 5 minutes to actually do. So, hopefully this has shown you how easy it really is to convert these custom controls into a more reusable artifact. Just one final caveat before I say goodbye. As I mentioned earlier, the format of this Java is, again, we can figure out what's going on in here. We're not going to want to maintain it in this format. So if your intention is to create a bunch of these library components so that they're more reusable, I would recommend 2 options. One is to dig into the whole extensibility API and learn how to create these components from scratch so that you bypass the XSP file model to begin with, and you're just writing your components directly in your OSGI library to start with. The far more simple option is when you copy over these files from the original custom control, just don't delete them from the original location. So if you ever want to make additional changes, change them in the original location, and then just copy over the modified Java file and redistribute your library. Because that's all you really need to do if you make changes, is just rebuild the source application and repush the Java class to the library. The exception to that is if you're actually going in and changing what properties are defined, because that modifies the XSP config file. So in that scenario, you would want to make sure that you sync the property definitions in here as well. But in most cases, once you've defined it here and copied it into a library, From then on, any changes that you make here, all you have to do is copy this one file again back to the library and redistribute it.
And that's the demo. I thank Tim for coming on. I know he wanted to do this two-part series of making the custom control in the last show and then showing how to make it a component in this show. And I hope he wants to come back and do some more. If you have any questions, please don't ask me. Ask Tim. If it's about the video. If it's about something else, then you can certainly ask me. And I thank you for your time.